right, Taylor. Well, now that we're both starving and only thinking about food, what do you have for us today? What do you have for the girls today?
Ladies, I'm going first today because my case is a little sad, but really showcases off like strong women. And just before I get into this is an extremely disturbing story all the way around and involves so much awful shit is just the best way to put it, that I'm just going to give a massive trigger warning for extreme violence against children, unborn children, newborns, and trigger warning rape. And we will also be discussing a lot of mental health issues and other details that are just not suitable for everybody to listen. So you might want to skip to Morgan's part if this is not going to be your vibe. But I just think it's such an important case to tell. And it's one of the very first true crime cases that I can remember breaking and watching. So this one's going to be a little different than a typical episode from me, a typical case from me. And as I said, I'm not going to be able to give you a trigger warning for every single thing that happens, or else every other word I would be saying trigger warning. And I chose this case for today. It's perfect because it really showcases just how strong and resilient women are.
Amen.
I'm literally want to cry thinking about it. Oh, we haven't even gotten to the story yet, Taylor. Okay, so the case I'm covering today is the case of JAYCEE Lee DUGARD. On June 10th, 1991, in Myers, California, 11-year-old JAYCEE got ready for school wearing her favorite all-pink outfit that she had picked out for herself and pulling her long blonde hair up into a ponytail. She was just a few weeks away from the end of the school year and had a few days away from her class's big end of the year field trip. And she was a little worried about it because she was shy and new to the area, as her family had just moved to Myers in the fall before September 1990. So JAYCEE's mother, Terry Probin, I believe that's how you pronounce it, had just moved her family, which is JAYCEE, Terry's new husband, Carl, and their newborn together, JAYCEE's half-little sister, Shayna, to Myers from Arcata, which is in Los Angeles County. So Terry and Carl had decided to make this move to Myers because it was a rural, small town just south of South Lake Tahoe, and Myers was just a safer community to raise their children in and just had better schools. So the morning of June 10th, Terry, who worked as a typesetter for a print house, left the family's home before JAYCEE had gotten up that morning. However, this was nothing out of the norm. As I said, JAYCEE got dressed, grabbed her backpack, and walked out the front door and began walking up this giant hill that led to the bus stop. And her stepfather, Carl, was standing on the front porch watching her the whole time, as he did every morning. So as 11-year-old JAYCEE reaches the bus stop, a gray car begins driving past her and slows down, pulling up directly beside her with the driver's side window rolled down, and it was closest to her. JAYCEE thought that the man was just going to be asking for directions, so she stopped walking and turned towards the car, as if she really had a choice, because literally the car was in arm's length from her. Like, right. It was so close. Of course you're going to turn and look at it and be like, oh, what the fuck are you doing?
Can I help you?
Yes. And I'm talking so close that the man driving was able to tase JAYCEE through the window using a stun gun, knocking her to the ground and into the bushes. According to some accounts, JAYCEE tried to crawl away, but it was no use, as a woman who was in the passenger seat of the car was already out of the car, picking up JAYCEE from the ground and dragging her into the back seat, holding her down and covering her mouth. Watching this unfold, Carl, JAYCEE's stepfather, who was just yards away, had already started sprinting to JAYCEE's aid, but he couldn't even get out of his yard before the car made a sharp U-turn at the bus stop and was now uncontrollably speeding towards him. Carl grabbed his mountain bike that was laying in the front yard and began pedaling faster than he ever had before, trying to follow the car, but it was too late. Carl quickly turned around and called 911, reporting JAYCEE's kidnapping. Luckily, since Carl had witnessed the entire fucking thing, he knew what the kidnappers looked like and what car they were driving, a gray, mid-sized Mercury Monarch. Immediately, law enforcement called in state and federal officials to aid in the investigation and search for 11-year-old JAYCEE. Everyone in the area was canvassed and interviewed. Countless searches were conducted, and thousands of tips and alleged sightings flooded in, with the entire area painted with flyers and photos of 11-year-old JAYCEE.
Can we talk about the nerve the kidnappers had?
Right, literally just pulled right up into a neighborhood
where her stepfather
was
standing
right there. Like, what if he had a car? Like, he could have jumped in his car and came after you. So, Child Quest International and the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children were heavily involved in the search efforts for JAYCEE as well, offering large rewards, getting national news attention, and even getting the case featured on America's Most Wanted just days after her abduction on June 14th, 1991. All sexual predators' homes were searched, convicted criminals were interviewed, and canine units were dispatched looking for any traces of JAYCEE or her scent in the South Lake Tahoe region. 11-year-old JAYCEE Lee DUGARD had been kidnapped, and there was not a trace of her. And unfortunately, these efforts were not extended to the Bay Area, and the convicted criminals there were not searched or interviewed, including convicted sexual predator and parolee Philip Garrido. Philip was born in Pittsburgh, California on April 5th, 1951. He grew up in Brentwood, California, where he graduated from Liberty High School in 1969. Philip was always different growing up. According to friends, classmates, and family, specifically his own father, according to Case Files podcast, Philip was obsessed with sex, and more so, he was obsessed with taking women's virginities, which is how he met his first wife and high school sweetheart, Christine Murphy. Starting in 1968, Philip began abusing a variety of drugs, including LSD, cocaine, and marijuana, which is what his father attributes to the personality changes, along with a severe motorcycle accident that he had gotten into around that same time. When he would go on these LSD or coke binges, he would wander into the public and masturbate to women as they walked around the malls, grocery stores, and schools.
God.
Therefore, when he was arrested in 1972 for drugging and repeatedly raping a 14-year-old girl in Antioch, the community was shocked, but honestly not surprised. However, he was never tried for this case as the victim refused to be interviewed or testify against her attacker. Therefore, he was able to walk free. Is there not something we can do about that?
Right.
Of course you don't want to see your attacker.
Right now.
Right. Oh, I hate it. So Philip had a violent and sickening sexual fantasies that only grew worse and worse with his drug use. Despite the allegations against Philip, he and Christine Murphy had eloped because he had denied all of the allegations and convinced her that he would never do such a thing. And she really didn't have anything to go off of because the community was not only not protecting his victim, but not protecting other women to falling victim to Philip. So the two elope, and it wasn't until years into their marriage that Christine was able to see the monster that he really was. Violent, abusive, jealous, controlling, a drug addict who was obsessed and overly fantasized about sex. In late 1976, Christine was working at a casino. I'm not okay. And I'm starving. In Reno, Nevada. Is it Nevada or Nevada? That's what they came at us for. Reno, Nevada. And Philip was hanging out at the bar while she worked, which is when he spotted a man flirting with his then wife. Instead of being angry at the man, he turned all of his anger and frustration and jealousy towards Christine and began to attack her. At one point, trying to push a safety pin into her eyeball. After this incident, she ran away, fleeing the state and staying with friends in order to protect herself from her husband. Philip was enraged and itching. So on November 22nd, 1976, he began driving around the South Lake Tahoe area near Myers, which is when he spotted 25-year-old Catherine Calloway, forcing her into his car and handcuffing her. Philip took off driving to a storage unit in Reno, where once they arrived there, which was later described as a sex palace by CBS News reporter E. Martinez, because of the amount of sex toys, porn, candles, stage lighting, and wine that filled the room. Philip took 4 hits of acid before continually raping Catherine for 5.5 hours straight.
Oh my God.
Until police officer Clifford Conrad, who had just been parked outside of the unit, found it suspicious that there was a car with California tags outside of a storage unit in Reno. So he went to investigate. According to the Seattle Times, when the officer got to the Phillips unit, he noticed that the warehouse lock had been broken into and knocked on the door. Philip answered the door, which is when Conrad was able to see Catherine Calloway mouthing the words, "Help me." Immediately, Officer Conrad arrested Philip, and he was later charged and convicted of his crimes. And actually, according to a few other sources, he had attempted to kidnap 2 other women just hours before abducting Catherine, and months before he had done it to another woman in June of 1976.
And this man's just roaming the streets.
He had abducted, and in June of 1976, he had abducted and raped another woman in South Lake Tahoe area again. However, I could not verify these instances through multiple sources, so that's why I said a few sources, but I think it should be mentioned. Upon his arrest, the court ordered a psychiatric evaluation to be performed on Philip, where he was diagnosed as a sexual deviant and chronic drug abuser, and it was then recommended by his psychiatrist that a neurological exam be conducted. Therefore, neurologist Albert F. Peterman, after performing an exam, explained that Philip showed considerable evidence of anxiety, depression, and a personality disorder. And this is all according to an article that was written by Los Angeles Times. On March 9th, 1977, Philip was convicted of his crimes, as well as masturbating in his car outside of elementary and high schools in the area, and federally sentenced to 50 years at Leavenworth Penitentiary in Kansas, which we've talked about Leavenworth multiple times, because so many big criminals have gone there.
They must be max security then.
Yeah, which is when he began serving that on June 30th, 1977. During this time, Christine was able to find her way legally out of their marriage, thankfully and safely.
Thank God.
Right. The officer assigned to Philip's case was Dan D. Marinville. And in an interview with the Associated Press, he explained that Philip came off as an extremely intelligent and educated in all of his interviews. Dan explained that Philip was pretty straightforward about all of his sexual urges and drug abuse, and when Dan asked him why he did this, Philip explained that it was the only way to satisfy his sexual cravings, giving the impression that he was ashamed and remorseful for his crimes. Philip told investigators that he was so addicted and dependent on drugs at the time that he had no control over his conduct, and that was in a news report written by CBS News. At Leavenworth, Philip met a woman named Nancy, as she had been visiting her uncle who was in prison there as well. The two said it was love at first sight and immediately began riding back and forth, talking on the phone and visiting each other as often as possible. Until Philip proposed to Nancy and the two got married in Leavenworth Penitentiary on October 5th, 1981. On January 22nd, 1988, Philip was released from Leavenworth and transferred to the Nevada State Prison, where he was transferred again on August 26, 1988 to the okay, you're going to have to help me with this. Is it Costa or Costa? It's the brand.
Costa.
I can't remember which one it is. Whatever one I used to think it was.
I think it's Costa.
Whatever. We only say it like twice. So whatever. You guys know what we're talking about. County. And released on parole after only serving 11 years of his 50-year sentence.
Are you kidding me?
Because the parole board noted that he was no longer, quote, a contributing menace to the health, safety, and morals of society.
Oh, he's no longer
I beg to fucking differ, right?
Right.
So upon his release, he lived in Antioch, caring for his elderly mother who suffered from dementia, with his wife by his side. He laid low in the first few months of his parole until he drove up to Lake Tahoe, where his victim, Catherine Calloway, worked at a bar. He entered the bar, sat down, and said to her, "It's been 11 years since I've had a drink." Catherine was shocked because she had not been alerted that her attacker had been released from prison 39 years early and reported this to Philip's parole agent. After this, Philip was assigned a GPS tracking ankle monitor and visited almost daily by law enforcement, local, state, and federal. Philip and his wife Nancy, along with his mother, moved into an unincorporated island of Antioch in that same county, Costa, whatever, after his move was approved by the parole officers. And for those who don't know, an unincorporated island is a region that is not governed by a local municipal, oh God, I can never say that word.
Municipal.
Thank you. Corporation, AKA they are just not a part of legally or legally included in the laws of the state and the communities that they're in. So thank you, Google, for that definition.
Information.
Yeah. So Philip and Nancy's house sat on about an acre of fenced-in land, with the house sitting directly on the street, only separated from the sidewalk by a small grassy front yard. There was a gravel driveway on the right side of the home, if you're looking at it from the street, that stretched from the road to the back fence. On the left side of the house, there was a grassy strip that runs along the fence and into the backyard. The backyard was actually split in half by a fence. So if you were to be in the grassy backyard that's directly behind the house, you would see a garden, well-kept grass, a garage, and another fence. And if you didn't know, you would literally think that that fence was a completely different property, but it actually belonged to Philip and Nancy. In the second backyard, which is approximately about a half acre, there were tons of shrubs and large trees that lined the fence, hiding what this area consisted of, which was a compound that had 3 sheds, one that was soundproofed and had electricity and had extension cords that ran to the other structures.
Now, why would you need a soundproof shed?
A trampoline, an above-ground swimming pool, an outhouse with a shower, and a fort-looking structure that consisted of tarps covering 2 small camping tents. Philip and Nancy had spent 1988, 1989, 1990, and the first half of 1991 building this compound, just waiting for the day that they could capture a victim together. They would drive around stalking bus stops, schools, malls, streets, neighborhoods, and grocery stores, just searching for the perfect location, child, and opportunity.
Doesn't this dude have an ankle monitor?
All the while still being on parole and having weekly visits with his parole officers. Now, let's go back to June 10th, 1991, to the moment that JAYCEE was abducted. According to her memoir and the interviews with ABC News, once Nancy drugged JAYCEE into the back of the car, she stripped all of her clothing off, wrapped her up in a blanket, and forced her to drink this water that had been laced with some sort of drug that caused her to go in and out of consciousness, and began holding her down as Philip drove the 120-mile, which is a 3-hour drive from Myers to Antioch. The entire drive, the couple teased and talked to JAYCEE as she tried to stay awake the entire time, literally fighting to try to stay awake. But the only thing she could manage to say was that her family could not afford a ransom. Once they arrived at the house in Antioch, Philip covered JAYCEE's face and body with a blanket and carried her through a series of dilapidated tents and structures into the soundproof shed, where he handcuffed her and left her naked. Before Philip explained that he had trained Dobermans outside and the door would be bolted shut, but if she tried to escape at any point, they were trained to attack and kill her. Hours later, Philip returned and forced JAYCEE to shower with him, keeping her in handcuffs the entire time. JAYCEE later wrote that this was the first time she had ever seen an unclothed man. After this, he took her back to the shed, where he handcuffed her with only a bucket to use the restroom in. Philip would occasionally bring her fast food to eat and talk with her for hours, but that was the only human interaction that she had. Philip would tell JAYCEE that demon angels allowed him to take her because she would help control his sexual issues that society had continued to ignore him about. At the 1 week mark after her abduction was the first time that Philip raped her while she was still handcuffed. And he would continue to rape her once a week, at least once a week. A few weeks later, Philip brought JAYCEE a TV and allowed her to watch shows. However, she was not allowed to watch news and had been blocked off of that TV. Approximately a month and a half after the abduction, Philip moved her into a larger shed that had a bed that he then handcuffed her to. Once she had been moved to this larger shed, Philip spent a lot of time in there with her, forcing her to cut out photos in pornographic magazines while he did meth, and had her put on makeup and wear these like nice dresses that he got her, after which he would rape her and then make her listen with him to the voices that spoke to him through the walls.
Oh my God.
He would talk for hours and hours about how he believes that he is a chosen servant of God, and sob and apologize to JAYCEE before becoming angry and threatening to sell her to people who would keep her in cages and beat her profusely.
She's in a cage. Literally.
He would then later, after all of this, after his like manic episodes, he would bring her gifts such as new clothes, makeup, books, and journals. So obviously just classic abuser,
So
drug addict bullshit.
So fucked up.
7 months after being abducted, in January of 1992, Philip decided to introduce JAYCEE to Nancy. And at first, JAYCEE was so thankful to have a woman around. It made her feel like a little bit more safe. That day, Nancy, when she first came into the shed to meet JAYCEE, she brought her stuffed animals and chocolate milk. The two talked for hours, where Nancy cried profusely, apologizing for abducting her and doing this to her. But even 11-year-old JAYCEE could tell that something was off. Nancy was not a nurturing woman, though she did want to come off that way, and she managed to do so, since she was a bedside fucking nurse at the time. Nancy was jealous of Philip's love for JAYCEE, which made her cold and evil. She was just as manipulative as Philip. But Nancy had chosen JAYCEE. Yes, you are hearing that correctly. She was the one who scouted and stalked JAYCEE before her abduction as a gift for her husband.
Oh my God.
On a few occasions, the couple would take JAYCEE on car rides when they would run quick errands, like going to the grocery store or the gas station. All the while, Philip, who was still on probation, having to meet with his parole officers and take drug tests often, in which he would wear a fake penis filled with water and Mountain Dew to pass. Which I'm like, then you're not even testing it.
Right.
Because, I mean, like,
that's not going to fly.
Right. Morgan does that for a living. She tests piss all the time.
Collects it.
Yeah. One day when he had gotten caught in the spring of 1992, and he was then arrested and sent to jail. During this time, Philip was gone, Nancy took over as JAYCEE's captor. Nancy one day brought JAYCEE a kitten to keep her company, leaving the kitten with her for a week. JAYCEE was so happy. Writing about it in her journal, she fed and took care of this kitten because it was the one thing that was hers. Until one day, Nancy had come in and gotten the kitten, telling JAYCEE that she needed to bathe it. Days went by, and Nancy finally told JAYCEE that her kitten had gotten loose and ran away. JAYCEE was fucking crushed, and Nancy made it up to her by getting her a second kitten. And then she did the same exact fucking thing. JAYCEE wrote pages and pages about what Nancy had been doing and just how fucking cruel she was. And then Nancy came into the shed to bring JAYCEE food when she was writing in her journal. Nancy took JAYCEE's journal and saw that she had signed each of the pages with her real name, JAYCEE Lee DUGARD. Nancy was enraged and tore out the pages, telling JAYCEE that she was never to speak or write her name ever again. JAYCEE was being manipulated and brainwashed, told that this was God's plan and that her parents wanted this to happen to her. Meanwhile, JAYCEE's mother, Terry, is hosting estate sales and working multiple jobs to pay for private investigators to help find her daughter. But JAYCEE had no idea. She wasn't allowed to watch the news. She rarely went outside, and she was told by everyone around her that this was just life and her new normal. After weeks of Nancy being the only person that JAYCEE saw, Philip had been released from jail, still on probation, but was allowed to return home, where he began doing the same awful things to JAYCEE. On May 3rd, 1992, JAYCEE turned 12, and she had been in captivity for 11 months at this point. They brought her gifts on her birthday and everything, and I think she said she got dresses and coloring books and games and stuff like that. They wanted to celebrate. They're fucked up in the head. They literally think that this is their kid.
Yep.
Little by little, Philip allowed JAYCEE to take breaks from her handcuffs, still locking her securely into the shed, and once he trusted that she was not going to try and run away, he allowed her to play outside in the compound under his supervision. According to the Mercury News, one day, JAYCEE was playing near the fence when a neighbor, Patrick McQuaid, was working in his yard on the other side of the fence. He was pulling weeds beside the fence. He was shocked to see a child there, as he knew Nancy and Philip did not have any children, nor did they have any family that ever visited them. Patrick said hello to JAYCEE and asked if she lived there or she was just visiting, to which she responded that she lived there and told him that her name was JAYCEE. Before JAYCEE could finish her sentence, Philip had come up behind her and took her back to the shed, punishing her. Patrick was in his 20s and at the time did not make the connection, later forgetting about the entire instance and brushing it off as some classic creepy Phil shit, which is what the town nicknamed Philip. Later, Philip added onto his fence, making it now 8 foot tall, where he set up a play tent for JAYCEE, making it the first time that she was ever allowed to be outdoors for long periods of time since her abduction. Another birthday went by for JAYCEE in 1992, where she turned 1993, where she turned 13, spending her days playing in her tent, journaling, frequent visits from both Nancy and Phil, and continually being raped by Phil. On Easter Sunday, April 3rd, 1994, JAYCEE was shocked when Nancy and Philip brought her first home-cooked meal since her abduction almost 3 years earlier. During this meal, they told JAYCEE some news that would change her life forever. They believed that she was pregnant due to the fact that she had been gaining weight, but JAYCEE had no clue, and no one knew that she was almost 5 months along at this point. Nancy and Philip allowed JAYCEE to watch birth videos to learn what it would be like. Though these videos were extremely educational for JAYCEE, she was scared because all of them had doctors and were in hospitals, and all she had was her abductors. That May, JAYCEE turned 14, and in June, she marked off another year in captivity, now pregnant. Nancy brought JAYCEE lots of food to keep her and the child nourished, offering to, quote, take this run for you, referring to having sex with Philip frequently.
Are you serious?
On August 18th, 1994, JAYCEE was in her shed when she began cramping, quickly realizing that she was in labor, calling for Nancy and Philip to help her. JAYCEE wrote in her book that giving birth was the most painful and scary experience of her life, but when she saw her daughter, and she was beautiful. JAYCEE said in an interview with ABC that at that moment, all she could think was, I wasn't alone anymore. I had somebody else who was mine. I wasn't alone. After the birth of her first daughter, Philip did not rape her as often as he used to because he was so in love with their child together. Every now and again, he would get high and go on his rants and force himself onto JAYCEE, but not as often as he did before, which to her was a win. And she needed every win that she could get to keep going, no longer for just herself, but for her daughter. During her birth and the years after, JAYCEE said that the only person she would think about was her mother and how badly she missed her. She needed motherly advice, someone to teach her, help her, care, and nurture for her and her child. And the last time Philip ever raped JAYCEE was in February of 1997 when she was 16 years old. That May, she turned 17, and this is when she realized that she was pregnant for the second time.
Oh my God.
On November 13th, 1997, JAYCEE gave birth to her second daughter. Using what she learned on TV, JAYCEE raised and took care of her daughters, doing everything she could to protect them from Philip and his drug-wild-induced rages and rants. Philip told JAYCEE that from there on out, she and her daughters would have to call him and Nancy mother and father because Nancy was like freaking the fuck out, thinking that she was getting booted out of her own family. That's not a family at all. And she was extremely jealous and they wanted to create some sort of normalcy for the girls as they grew up.
Does Nancy realize that she did this?
Yeah, Nancy, you fucking did this. So JAYCEE told her daughters that she was their older sister. She homeschooled her daughters and taught them how to plant gardens, vegetables, and flowers, allowing them to play outside and swim in the above-ground swimming pool. And then Nancy and Philip began taking JAYCEE and the girls on outings to shop for school supplies, food, clothes, and toys. Eventually, Philip opened up a print shop where JAYCEE was his graphic designer and assistant, working on the phones, speaking with customers, and managing emails, but never calling or hinting for help out of fear of what would happen to her daughters. As JAYCEE and her daughters are integrating their way back into society little by little, using fake names such as JAYCEE's was Alyssa, Philip's mental health was deteriorating, and this is from constant drug use from over the years. He would record religious songs and music in the soundproof shed that he used to keep JAYCEE in at first. It was now his studio and office where he started a blog called God's Desire Church, in which he would claim that he had the power to control sound with his mind.
Okay.
Jesus. Asking, this is so embarrassing what I'm about to say. I get secondhand embarrassment when I was reading it, when I researched it, and when I typed it.
Great.
So he believed in these powers so much that he would ask his customers from the print shop, neighbors, and strangers to write testimonials about his abilities to prove the amazing phenomena that was happening within him.
Okay, Philip.
Jesus, Philip.
All right, Philip.
We know you're crazy, but like, holy hell. JC was now living in the main house with Nancy and Philip primarily, still being in the back the majority of the time, but that's where the kids wanted to be, near their dad. Retrieving the mail, answering the door, or running errands with Philip or Nancy. She was known in the area as Alyssa, but not JC. On August 24th, 2009, Philip drove all the way to San Francisco with JC's 2 daughters in order to drop off a 4-page handwritten essay to the FBI's office. In the essay, Philip wrote about his thoughts on religion and sexuality, claiming that he knew how to cure people like him, aka violent sexual predators. And
so he considers himself cured.
Right.
Great.
And he said he learned this technique because he cured himself. But yet you still have a girl captive in your house.
You're cured for sure. Yeah.
Right. 18 years later. So that same day, after leaving the FBI's office, he and the 2 girls went to the campus of UC Berkeley, where he went to the police office there and spoke with the special events manager, Lisa Campbell, about getting permission to host an event on the campus as a part of his God's Desire program that he had now been perfecting and writing about for almost 18 years. Lisa could tell that something was off by Philip's erratic behavior and how submissive the 2 girls were, looking at Philip for permission to speak, move, or even nod their heads. Thinking on her feet, Lisa told Philip that she had availability to meet with him the next day at 2 p.m., where all she needed him to do was fill out a form using his full name, which is immediately after he left, she passed over all of this information to Officer Allie Jacobs, who immediately ran a background report check and discovered Philip's dark past. The next day, Philip and the 2 girls returned to their meeting with Lisa, where Officer Allie Jacobs sat in on it. And the reason why she sat in there was because she wanted to get a good description of the girls that were with him. She noted that they seemed to be extremely pale, as if they were not allowed to be outside, timid, and subconsciously over-aware of every move, word, and mood change that Philip expressed. Officer Allie Jacobs called this in to Philip's parole officer, expressing all of her concerns in a voicemail. After receiving the voicemail on August 26, 2009, 2 parole officers were dispatched to Philip and Nancy's home, where upon arrival, Philip was detained and the house was searched. However, officers could not find anything other than Philip's mother and Nancy. The officers then took Philip to the parole office for questioning, where he explained that the girls he was with yesterday and the day before were his nieces. After this questioning, despite the fact that he had broken his parole by 1, being alone with minors, 2, being in a large distance outside of where his parole limits were, right. He was driven home and ordered to come back to the parole office the next day for more questioning, which he did, bringing Nancy, JAYCEE, or Alyssa, and the 2 girls along with him, again introducing JAYCEE as his niece Alyssa and her 2 younger sisters. This shocked Philip's parole officers, as for the last 21 years that they had been in and around his home, as he was literally on federal probation, they had never seen these girls before or even heard of them. The parole officers decided to separate Nancy and Philip from JAYCEE and her daughters in order to obtain full identification from them. JAYCEE maintained that her name was Alyssa and the girls were her little sisters and that Philip was their uncle. Officers explained to JAYCEE that they could be in serious danger, as Philip was a registered sex offender with a violent past. JAYCEE continued to go back and forth with the officers, explaining that Philip was a changed man, a great person, and always good to her and her kids. And it slipped up, which is when she quickly changed her story, saying that she was staying with Nancy and Philip to escape her abusive husband in a different state, trying to protect her children. Officers began pushing for details, trying to get JAYCEE to confirm her identity, because the more they pushed, questioned, and listened, the more they realized that this could be, standing in front of them, JAYCEE Lee DUGARD, the girl who had been abducted 18 years earlier. JAYCEE refused. She was persistent, with her daughters screaming and echoing all that she said. It was literally fight or flight in real life. Relaying this information over to the officers with Philip, they began interrogating him about JAYCEE's identity, which is when he admitted that Alyssa was actually JAYCEE Lee DUGARD.
Oh my God.
And once JAYCEE learned that he had admitted this to police, what he and Nancy had done for the last 18 years, she finally said her name for the first time in 10 years. I am JAYCEE Lee DUGARD, and these are my daughters. JAYCEE told officers about the kidnapping, the sheds, the backyard, the rape, her daughters being born, the abuse, the brainwashing, everything. At this point, FBI had already arrived at the scene, arresting Philip and Nancy and putting JAYCEE on the phone. I hate this part. With her mother for the first time in 18 years. And her first words to her mother were, "Hi, Mom, I have babies."
Aww.
That shot my heart. JAYCEE was 29 years old when she was reunited with her family, and her daughters were now 11 and 15. JAYCEE and her daughters struggled with the change, as that this was all they had known for the majority of their life, a family with Nancy and Philip, and the girls desperately missed their father. They had no idea that anything was wrong this entire time. On October 14th, 2009, People magazine published the first verified photo of JAYCEE Lee DUGARD as an adult on its cover. And I literally remember this. I remember the photo. I remember my mom buying the copy of People magazine. And I remember just learning about it and watching it on 2020 in breaking news and all that stuff. After years of legal proceedings, on June 2nd, 2011, Philip was sentenced to 431 years to life in prison, and Nancy was sentenced to 36 years to life for kidnapping. They were both charged for kidnapping, rape, and false imprisonment. But side note, technically, they are eligible for parole in 2034.
Are you kidding?
And I know that doesn't seem like it seems like the longest time ever to think about 2034, but like really it's not.
Right. And didn't we learn our lesson?
Did we not learn not to do this? Right. So let me find where I was. Okay. A month later, on July 12th, 2011, JAYCEE published her first book titled A Stolen Life, a Memoir. Immediately after JAYCEE and her daughter's rescue, Philip and Nancy's home and property was raided by investigators, with thousands of photos taken of the compound that JAYCEE had been kept in for 18 years, which I highly encourage you guys to go look at. All it takes is a quick Google search. They're all on there. In November of 2009, a report was released by local, state, and federal law enforcement with a formal apology to JAYCEE and her family because of all of the missed opportunities to rescue and protect her and her daughters, starting with the fact that they overlooked the possibility that Philip could have been involved in her abduction, and the area that she was taken was the same place where he had committed his first violent crimes and was known to roam, and he had only been registered as a low-level sex offender, despite his violent crimes, mental health diagnosis, and erratic behavior. Failing to make the connection in this case caused JAYCEE her life. Well, 18 years of her life, not her whole life. Next, on April 22nd, 1992, less than a year after JAYCEE's abduction, which this is around the same time that Philip and Nancy began allowing her to ride in the car with them as they ran those small errands that I talked about.
Yeah.
They had gone to a gas station, which is when in Contra Costa, whatever county, when a man called 911 reporting this sighting. He had been at the gas station less than 2 miles away from Philip and Nancy's home, where he spotted a flyer when he was checking out, and it had a photo of JAYCEE on it. After paying, he walked out to his car, which is when he saw JAYCEE in the flesh in a large yellow Dodge van, and reported all of these details to police. When police arrived at the gas station, JAYCEE, the caller, and the van were gone, and police did not pursue this lead as the caller had not left his information, aka it was not requested by the dispatcher. In 2009, when raiding the property in the compound, investigators found that same Dodge yellow van matching the description exactly. JAYCEE later stated that she did not remember leaving the home until August of 1994. However, it could have been possible, and she just didn't remember, or the dates of the reporting was wrong. In June of 2002, Philip's neighbor called 911 after witnessing a child with a severe shoulder injury swimming in the pool behind the home. Firefighters responded and spoke with Phil and the next door neighbor that had made the report, and Philip explained that there were no children on the property. This report was not relayed to his parole officer, failing JAYCEE once again. In 2006, another one of Philip's neighbors called 911 reporting a child, or multiple children, living in tents in his backyard, saying that they were worried that because Philip was, quote, psychotic with a violent past and sexual addictions. The deputy that responded to the call spoke with Philip in his front yard for over half an hour. Again, never reporting this or investigating this claim, only threatening him with a code violation for the neighborhood.
Really?
On November 4th, 2009, and in that formal apology that was issued that I talked about, it was issued by the California Office of Inspector General, and they called out the California Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation because of the report that they found made by a parole officer that was never filed or investigated, where Philip's parole officer encountered a 12-year-old girl at the home, and it was JAYCEE when she was 12 years old. Philip and Nancy told the officer that his brother had dropped off his kids to visit with their mother, who was living with Philip and Nancy. However, due to her old age and severe dementia, the mother could not confirm this. The officer who encountered this girl did not even look into the fact that Philip's brother did not have fucking children.
My God.
JAYCEE was given a $1.2 million I can't think of the settlement in damages from the state of California, along with their apology. But think about it. After everything that she had been through, is that really the price of 18 years of your life?
No.
Her children being born in a shed, and the abuse she withstood because police did not take these reports seriously or take Philip's parole seriously? No. So on September 22nd, 2011, JAYCEE filed a lawsuit in the United States District Court of the Northern District of California, suing the United States for failing to monitor a federal parolee and violations that the parole officers knew about, where they did not revoke Philip's parole, returning him to prison on multiple occasions before and after her abduction. This case was dismissed by the U.S. Court of the Ninth Circuit in 2016, saying that the U.S. and the state of California did nothing wrong due to them living in an unincorporated community. The state of California had no duty to protect her or the other members of the general public from Philip. However, the Chief District Court Judge, William Smith, believes that she has an amazing and legitimate legal grounds to hold the government liable, and she will continue to fight. As if she hasn't fought or gone through enough, at this point. On July 12th, 2016, JAYCEE released her second book titled Freedom, My First Book, where she focuses on her life since her first publication. JAYCEE has been featured on almost every crime show, 2020, 48 Hours, ID, etc., and has been interviewed by some of the greatest reporters in history, specifically women such as Diane Sawyer, who will continue to fight for JAYCEE and share her story. JAYCEE was awarded the Lifetime Leadership Honor at the 3rd Annual DVF Awards, and she and her mother founded the JAYCEE, which is JAYCEE Foundation, that stands for Just Ask Yourself to Care.
Aww.
Providing support to families who have been dealing with similar situations that she and her family did. JAYCEE and her family now live in an undisclosed town in California where a clinical therapy service for long-term trauma and abuse called Transitioning Families aided JAYCEE in building a home for her and her family the way that she wanted it and needed it to be for them to return back to normal life. JAYCEE learned how to drive, got to see her favorite artists in concert, such as Lady Gaga and Beyonce.
Yes, girl.
And JAYCEE goes to animal therapy, working with horses and reconnecting with her mother and sister, now living a happy, healthy life with her family, her daughters, and safe from her attackers. And that's the case. I hate it.
She is amazing, though.
I know.
What an amazing human being.
And let's just stop for a second, because you realize, everybody, that JAYCEE would not have been discovered if it was not for those two women, Officer Allie Jacobs and Lisa, I can't think of her last name, Campbell maybe, from the UC Berkeley.
The two younger girls.
What?
From noticing the two younger, her daughters.
Yeah, for noticing that something was wrong.
Yep.
And they were the ones that pushed to get the parole officers to go out there and investigate, because all these other people, all these parole officers had failed her. And then these two women who had no idea who Philip was knew something was wrong with those girls and wanted to save them.
Hell yes.
So yeah, this is a story about strong ass fucking women. And it's so emotional and it's sad, and her life was stolen from her. But, you know, her story needs to be shared, and she deserves all the recognition.
Absolutely.
Of being...
She is an absolute boss, period.
Boss. Not a girl boss.
Just a boss.
Right.
So, oh, my God.
Take a breath. I literally thought for a bit that I wasn't going to be able to get through that. If you're watching the YouTube video, I'm so sorry. I had to move my stance so much because I'm like holding my breath this entire case.
What a beautiful woman.
Yeah, right. I thought you were going to say beautiful story. I was like, it's not a beautiful story. Yeah.
Just like, I'm in awe.
It was just like not graceful.
Women are fucking amazing.
Right. And like, what the hell was going on in California?
I just don't know if I'd have that, I don't even know what word I'm looking for.
Strength.
I don't know in me. Like, I think I'd be like, you know what?
18 years. She was 11 years old. She was 29.
Yeah.
18 years. She didn't even know how to drive.
Oh, man.
She had a daughter when she was 14 and her second daughter when she was 17 years old. Meanwhile, being, trigger warning, raped the entire time.
Yep.